All right, so can anyone tell me about pseudocoding?
Pseudocoding to me is like before writing code, just writing exactly what is it that you want to accomplish step by step. So when you start coding your program, you actually have a clear idea of what is it that you're going to do.
Okay, good. Yeah. So what kind of things do you need to do in order to pseudocode?
Maybe think about the input and the desired output.
Yep. Okay, good. So you have to think about inputs and outputs. And how do you know what the inputs and outputs should be?
I guess as you like read the problem that you're given, you examine what you're being asked to do.
Yeah. And, you know, what if there's, what if not everything is written in the problem?
I guess you can like just put those questions in your pseudocode as so that you can ask wherever you got the problem from, like before you start working.
Yeah, so exactly. So you'll have to ask questions. So if your problem is like in the context of an interview, so you're sitting down for an interview and they ask you to code something up, then you would want to ask clarifying questions of the person who's interviewing you. In the context of a job, you'll want to ask other people on your team, or if you need to get information from another team, you'll have to do that. But so kind of requirements, gathering requirements. So you have to figure out what the problem is. That's really the first and hardest part of coding, oftentimes in a practical situation, is really understanding what the problem is, understanding all the inputs and outputs, the things you need to watch out for, and where to get that information from. Once you have all that information, you have a clear picture of what you're supposed to be doing, then pseudocoding is there to give you a plan, a structured plan that you can refer to as you're coding. So one of the challenges of writing code is that you're constantly switching between very low level stuff, very detailed low level stuff, and then higher level stuff. And it's very easy to get mired down in the small detail, especially when you're new, or if you're doing something you haven't done before. If you have a particularly like challenging section of code that you're working on, you focus really narrows to this. Okay, how do I manipulate this string to do X, Y, Z, blah, blah, blah. You kind of just lose sight of the bigger context. So having pseudocode, it's the same reason that I encourage you to draw diagrams of things. So you can have that higher level structure out there, something you can look at, so you don't have to constantly track that simultaneously in your head, because it's too hard to keep all these things together. All right. So we're gonna work on a problem, and we're kind of gonna like try to mock basically or imitate how you would get the problem and how you would solve it on the job. So here is a Trello board. So this is one way of organizing work on a team. There are other systems, but they all kind of are basically similar. So typically you'll have different categories of things. So you have a backlog. So a backlog will consist of tasks that have to be done, but that aren't like immediately relevant or happening. It's kind of just like a storage container for all kinds of things that need to eventually get done. And then you could have a to-do or something that you're working on in the current sprint. Has anyone either worked in an agile context or heard of agile?
Yeah, briefly. It's kind of basically the framework for getting things done, typically, or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's basically the standard workflow for software development now. So pretty much anywhere you work, they're going to use something like this agile system. And agile is a way of dividing work into basically sprints. So there are higher level aggregations, but the important one is the sprint, and a sprint is typically 2 weeks. So as you're working, the kind of pace of your work is like every 2 weeks, every 2 weeks, every 2 weeks, every 2 weeks. So that's kind of your window of your window into the future is about 2 weeks long. And in those 2 weeks, your team is going to have a bunch of stories or tasks. So the terminology typically used is a story. So if you get some task or some assignment, or like what we do, like a challenge or something like that, that would be called a story. And you, in a given sprint, in a given 2 week sprint, you'll have a bunch of stories that your team is expected to get done. And those stories will be estimated in terms of how long it takes to get done. So your manager or scrum leader, whatever leader of your team is going to organize things and say, okay, we have 2 weeks, we have 5 people on our team, and we have this many stories. So we're pretty sure that we can complete all of these stories. And then when it comes to the day-to-day stuff that you'll be doing, is you'll pull something up that either from the backlog or from whatever you're working on in the current sprint, and then you'll just do that. So the level of work at the individual will be a story like this. Excuse me. So you can see here we have optimized group by query, fix users list strategy. So these are just some like made up tasks. And then the one that we're going to work on is called add travel package. So let's just say you get assigned to this one. Let's see if I can. So I'm going to move this over to the to-do column, and I'm going to take a look at it. So let's see, can I add this to me or something? Okay, so now I'm assigned to this task. So you don't have to worry about the details of this, but let's say, so I'm now assigned to this task. So I come in the morning, and now it's my job to finish this. And a task could take you a couple hours, it could take you a couple weeks, it just depends. So here's the description. So write a class that gets a user's budget, gets a user's destination based on the budget, displays a confirmation message to the user. And then there's another note, coordinate with Tiffany on the backend team for destination data. Okay. So we have the task in the task description, and this is a pretty decent description. Oftentimes you'll get much less than this, and oftentimes the person assigning you the task doesn't really know what's involved in the task, especially for things like bugs, like something's broken, we need to fix it, so we can't like tell you exactly what you have to do to fix it. So I'm going to take that information in the ticket, and I'm going to call this I'm going to paste this in here. All right. So now we can start planning. So the first question would be, well, a couple things you can do, and sometimes the things you do aren't necessarily in a fixed order. You'll have to go back and I start with some assumptions, I start working on something, I realize that assumption doesn't hold, so I have to go back. So it's an iterative process. But for now, write a class that gets a user's budget, gets a user's destination based on the budget, displays a confirmation message to the user, coordinate with Tiffany on the backend team for destination data. So we know we have to write a class. So it's going to be something like class travel package. And then the basic questions I would ask is what properties does this thing have to have, and what methods does it have to have? So based on our requirements, what properties do you think travel package needs to have?
User's budget, a
Okay.
destination.
So what do you mean
Yeah.
by a destination?
I guess maybe like a list of destinations that are within the user's budget.
Okay. So let's see, destinations in user budget.
And then maybe like a method.
So we'll just focus on the properties first. Can anyone think of any other properties that we might need to have? This is not a final list. We can come back to this.
How long they're gonna be there?
How long? Okay, so that would definitely be a good thing to think about. That's not directly in the requirements, so that might be an additional feature that we could add on. So another thing to I guess think about or track is something called scope creep. So scope creep is basically when you start working on something and then you start adding something else, or you realize it's connected to another problem that so you want to try and solve that problem. And so you get this task, which is supposed to be kind of an isolated thing, and it just expands and expands and expands. So you want to watch out for that. That's a thing that can happen. So if you thought, okay, we should probably know, how long a user is going to spend at their destination, that would be a question you would ask, someone, your boss or whoever. So if that's something that you thought, hey, maybe we should do that. It's not in the requirements, but I think actually we're probably going to need that information because we're working on X feature later on, and so it would be good to have that now. So that's a kind of discussion that you can have. But for now, let's say we don't need that.
I guess we need an actual user.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. Okay, so let's move on to methods then. So what methods are we going to need?
Be a method to display the confirmation message.
Okay. Display information message.
You need a method to fetch the travel data.
Okay.
You could use a method to get the budget, I guess, or return the budget.
Okay. Yeah, so we have a user budget property, but maybe we're not sure where that's gonna actually come from. So yeah, let's write a get user budget.
Maybe a method that compares the user budget to the destinations within his budget.
Okay, yeah, so get destinations within user budget. Okay,
I guess you will also need to store all of that information somewhere. So like creating some database in a different file with that stores all the information for each user.
okay. So we could definitely have I'm gonna keep this simple. But yes, you're right. In a real application, we would be hitting a database that had user information. But I'm gonna basically just say that we don't have to worry about like checking a database for users. But yes, that is a good thought. Okay, so where are we getting the travel data from?
CSV.
Could be. How do you know that?
Oh, I don't know. I just guessed.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, that's a good guess, but
I guess in this case, in the beginning, we can get an input from the user.
so we can, I guess what I'm wondering is we have this get travel data method, and we have destinations and user budget, but where are the destinations?
So do we need a list of like destinations?
Yeah, I think we're gonna need the, basically the list of all possible destinations.
We gotta ask Tiffany for that. I'm
Yeah,
guessing.
yeah, I think we have to. So there's a note here in our ticket which says coordinate with Tiffany on the backend team for destination data. So I'm gonna add another property here, and I can call it all possible destinations. And then I think get travel data will basically be this. So I'll call this fetch. Yeah. Okay. So if we think about our application now, we have a user budget, which we'll need for, well, let's start at the beginning. So we have all possible destinations. So any possible destination that are, that someone could travel to, regardless of budget, we have that. We have a user, and then we have the user's budget. And part of the point of a user budget is to filter down this list of all possible destinations. So this is the filtered list, all the destinations within the user's budget. And then we have methods to, I guess, the order we do this in, we're not sure yet, but let's say we fetch all the destinations, and then we get the user's budget, and then we filter down that list, and then at the end, the user, how will the user tell us which particular destination?
So we need a method for the user to specify which destination they want to pick out of all the possible destination within their budget.
Yeah. So choose destination. Okay, so I think this is a good start. So we have to ask Tiffany for some information. So, you know, on my team, we use Slack. And so I know that Tiffany's on another team, but she's in this Slack channel. So I'm gonna hit up Tiffany. Tiffany. Hey Tiffany. I'm working on copy the link there. I wonder if you can get a link to this particular thing. Cool. Working on the travel package, whatever this is called, ticket. Do you have some sample data? I don't know if Tiffany's here. Should check first.
I'm here. Yep.
So especially in a remote context, but even if you're not working remotely, you'll use some tool like Slack. And then you'll probably have a bunch of different channels for different teams or different, specializations. And your workday will be a mix of looking stuff up on the internet and asking your teammates questions and you'll spend the least time actually writing code. Okay, cool. Thanks. All right, cool. So we got some data from Tiffany. So I'm gonna take that. Oh, and she says it's in a CSV file. That's very helpful. So now we know that our data is in a CSV file and we have some of that sample data. So when we, let's see, fetch all possible destinations, we know that this is going to be reading from a CSV file. So I'm just going to go ahead and put this right here. CSV. So can anyone tell me about this file? What's going on here? What is a CSV file?
Separated files. Go ahead.
It's just a file type that has comma separated values.
Okay. So is there is there anything special about this?
Yeah. So I'm just kind of learning about it, but I guess because of the commas, you can pull it in different ways. You can make a list out of it, or you can make an object out of it if you have the right identifiers, I think.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so in Python has some tools specifically for reading CSV files. So when
This, can the CSV, I know it's comma separated. Can the delimiter be anything? Semicolons, spaces, tabs, doesn't matter.
Yeah, it could potentially be anything. So there's comma separated value. Another less common one is tab separated values of TSV. So you can, you'll see different delimiters potentially, but what is what kind of thing do you use a CSV for? What kind of data? Like, why not just a text file?
Well, technically, isn't it? I mean, it kind of it is just plain text.
Yes, it is.
But it's basically like a table, tabulated data.
Yes.
And then so the first row is usually the column headings, or what would be the column headings, and then the subsequent rows are the actual data, and then the delimiters are what identify or what connect individual data points to their fields or the columns.
Yeah, exactly. So use CSV for tabular data. So if I have a table with columns and rows, then CSV is a way of representing that with kind of minimal overhead, basically. So the commas are just a convention, but the first row, if it exists, is typically going to be your column names. So everything under here is going to be a country. So Japan is a country, Colombia is a country, France is a country. And the next one over cost, everything after the first comma is going to be a cost. So this is a cost, this is a cost, this is a cost. And then a row of data is going to be some basically instance that you care about. Okay, so great. We've got our at least the sample data for this. So let's start coding this out. All right, so class travel package def init. So pass. So I'm gonna go ahead and stub out all of these methods. We may or may not need them, we'll see. And if anyone has any questions while I'm doing this, feel free to ask. Okie doke. So now that we have these methods stubbed out, I guess I could also add these here. So let me do that. Self dot budget. Not sure where this is going to come from yet, so I'll just do this for now. All possible destinations. Okay, so we have a basic kind of skeleton, at least initial skeleton, maybe we'll change some stuff, of what this is going to look like. So we should now think more carefully about data types. So what is a user budget? What kind of data is that going to be?
Say a dictionary.
A dictionary?
Integer.
Okay.
I mean, if it would be a float, right? Because it's money.
It could be a float. So in general, floats are we should avoid floats, just because of the lack of precision. But yeah, a float or a number. I'm just gonna make it an integer. So Python is not statically typed, so you don't have to tell it type. You actually can optionally do that. We're not going to do that, but I'll just show you. So you can do this. And Python will allow you to do this. So if in statically typed languages, you'll see stuff like this, which you have to do. You have to tell it what type it is when you define it. In Python, you don't have to do that. But you optionally can use types. The Python compiler will just ignore it, so it's not enforced, but it's there for you to look at. I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to assign it to at least initially, to a value which is an integer, so we know that it's an integer. What about user?
Can we pass in user maybe when we initiate the travel package?
We could pass it in, but what data type could user be or should user be?
String.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
It could be another object, maybe.
Yep. Yeah. So in a a more realistic application, it would probably be an object, or we'd have a user class or something like that. But to keep things simple, we'll just make it a string. So user will just be a string. Budget is an integer. What about destinations in user budget?
A list.
Okay, could be a list. A list of what?
Destinations that fit user budget.
Right, but in terms of data types, so it's a list of integers.
Strings. I would think it'd be strings.
String and integer.
Sorry.
It could be a string and an integer, or it could be two strings.
Okay. A list of strings. Okay, so we have destinations and user budget. Well, maybe we should start with this one. I mean, it's gonna be the same thing anyway, but so all possible destinations. We know, let's say it's gonna be a list. And we're getting the data from here. So what information does a given destination need to have?
Is it going to be a list of nested lists, and inside the nested list will be a string and an integer?
Okay, so we could definitely do that. So an example would be something like Japan, and we'd have a bunch of these. So you could do something like that.
I guess you could do tuples as well.
Yep, yeah, you could do tuples.
We could also use a dictionary, right?
Yep, yeah, we could use a dictionary. We'd have destination Japan and 1,000. So there are lots of different ways of doing that. As you can see, there's several possibilities. I'm gonna lean toward using a dictionary, but that's somewhat arbitrary. One reason I would do that is because I want to make sure that I can attach a meaning to each one of these things. So country, Japan, cost, 1,100.
Could you just return just a list of strings for the country and then have another method that returns the cost based on what the string, or would it be just easier to have the tuples or the dictionary? Or
I think it would be easier to keep this data. So this data, a given row, this data is associated. So we could have one method that just read this and another method that just read this in, but we'd still have to solve the problem of putting them together again. So we could either read two things in separately, then put them in together, or just read them in together. Okay, so I'm going to say that this is going to be a list of dictionaries. And this will also be a list of dictionaries. All right, what about this display confirmation message? So what is it going to take as input, and what is it going to return?
You could probably just get away with not putting any input and then just return a message.
Yeah. Okay. So what data type? So I could pass in nothing, and what data type would I return?
Just a string.
Okay. Will that display anything?
It should, if we return it, it should display in the terminal, right?
Any
You're asking a question.
Can we print it? Like
You-
just print.
So we could
If-
print message.
If we loop through our dictionary and we find a match, can we just use an F string to print that match to the console?
Yes. So I don't really want to think about the implementation. We're not going to worry about how this is going to be implemented, but just what is it going to return? So should it return a string, or should it print something out?
Did it return
What's
just
the
a
difference?
boolean?
It could return a Boolean. So the method name is called display confirmation message.
I would just say print it out. Cause like what you said, the method name is just
Okay.
displaying it.
So if we print it out, what will we be returning?
Nothing.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just going to make a note here. Again, you can use type annotations here and there's an arrow. We could do that, which means this method returns none. But I won't do that. So I'll just make a note here. Returns none. What about get user budget?
That's you'll pass self in. I guess that's already being passed in, so you don't
Yeah.
have to pass anything else, and you return the user budget.
Okay. So what is the user budget? What type?
Integer.
Okay. So we could return integer. We can definitely go back. We may need to go back and make some modifications, but that's fine. So user budget returns integer. What about get destinations within user budget?
We could return like a list with just the destinations.
Okay. So it will return. Let's do return list of the. Oops. All right, and then choose destination.
Guess they're gonna return a string.
Okay. And this one should be the same, I guess. Well, we'll keep the pattern for now. Okay, so
Chat, I have a question.
yes.
Is there any reason that we're using list of dictionaries instead of just using dictionary?
Yeah, so that's a good question. They don't have any thoughts on that?
My only thought for why we were using lists, because I thought about that when we went over it, was like if you're displaying it to the user to pick one when they do the choose destination, it just probably is going to be more readable if you have these are your destinations. And you could even do it like tuples where this is your destination and the cost.
Okay. So let's I'm gonna try and create a list. I'm gonna create a list here, and I'm gonna do country, oops, France, cost, 1500, and I can copy this. Okay. So here's basically how we're imagining doing this. If I just had a dictionary, how would I?
It will just be the country and the cost, and you wouldn't be able to show the basically the category, like the country and the cost.
Yeah, so I could do something like France, 1500, and Colombia, etc.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. So this could work, and that would be fine. It's very similar to if we had done a list of like tuples. So if we do it this way, we kind of keep the meaning of associated with it, which you don't have to do. Another thing to think about, well, yeah, I don't want to get into it, but it's likely that data like this, we're saying we're reading it from a file, but it's likely that it would come from an API call. And so, there's an argument to be made that it's nice to have the meaning of the data associated with the data. But you don't have to, and either one will work. But yeah.
And Chad, is there like a huge difference accessing the data from the dictionary versus accessing the data from the dictionary while it's in a list as far as like efficiency when you're trying to access the data? Is it big to where
so great question. So ultimately what we want to do with this is we're going to have to iterate over this and then look at the price and basically create a filtered subset, right? So we're going to need to iterate over each element, either if it's just a key value pair here, or if it's a list of tuples, or if it's a list of dictionaries. So whatever that element is, we're gonna have to iterate over it, check the cost, and then filter it out. So what's the we haven't you guys haven't talked about Big O yet, right? Yeah, I think we're gonna do that next week. So the time complexity for accessing a key is O of 1. So basically, it's very fast. You can immediately find if you know that you're looking for France, you can immediately go there if you're using a dictionary. You can find the key immediately. If you have a list, and you want to access France. Well, I don't have direct access to France. I'm gonna have to check every single element and to see if it's France. I can't jump directly to France if it's in a list. So if we knew that the user wanted to go specifically to Colombia or whatever, then a dictionary would be good because you know, it would be efficient to do that because you could go directly to there if you know it. But if you don't know what the destination is, and here we don't know because we have to filter based on cost, then you're still going to have to iterate through every single element. So the benefit, the like efficiency benefit of using a dictionary goes away because we still have to check every single item.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Why don't we take a 10-minute break and we'll come back and we'll start writing some code. All right, so we've got, I think the outline, we have our types set up. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna start writing some tests. So I'm gonna go over here and tests.py. And I'm gonna use the standard library unit test. So import unit test. I'm gonna create my test class test travel package, which is going to inherit from unit test case. And then I'm going to write a bunch of methods, which I'll do in a second. And then to run it, there's a couple ways to run it, but if name equals main unit test dot name. All right, so I'm going to split this to the right. All right, so we look at the code here. We're going to need to create an instance of travel package. And then if I call display confirmation message, it should return none. So I'm going to write a test for that. So what's the rule for method names here?
Begin with test.
Yes. So def test underscore so I need an instance of travel package, but I'm getting a yellow squiggly line. It's telling me, let's see, it's not defined. So what does that mean?
You have to import that file.
Yes. So this is the file name, travel packet, which happens to have the same name as the class, but doesn't have to import the class travel package. And if I do self.assert is none, tp.display confirmation message. All right, and then I can do the same thing with these other ones. So def test. So while I'm doing this, why in the world would I waste all of this time and effort writing tests?
It might save you some of that on the back end.
Yeah, how so? I'm skeptical.
Just because you can kind of pinpoint what's wrong with it. But also if you're writing tests as you go, you you shouldn't run into any issues if you keep making sure that they pass.
Yeah, so if I have some scaffolding here, if I know that I have a bunch of tests and I know what the return value is going to be, I can refactor this method and be confident that it's not going to break everything. I'm just gonna say return list of dictionaries, return none. I think you'll also see that when you write tests, you're forced to think about your design choices a little bit more carefully.
What do you mean by design choice? Like which method to put down first, or?
How you structure everything. So for example, how would you test? How would you really test? So I have, in kind of an initial test here, but how would you really test something like display confirmation message?
Like to see if it prints out the message you wanted to print out, basically.
But how would you test that? How would you test if something prints out a message?
You can use assert is equal to the string of that message.
Okay. Is that going to work?
No, it's not returning any values.
What do you mean it's not returning values?
I guess if you run the function, it's just gonna return none if there's a print statement in there.
Okay. So if I print something out if I print something out that actually just returns none, it's not actually printing anything, or it's not actually returning anything.
No.
Okay, so the question still stands then, how would I test something like that?
Could you do it? Oh, my camera's off, sorry. Could you do like a return print?
What does that mean?
So in the method, you're still returning out of it, but it also prints to the terminal at the same time.
Okay. You could do something like that. So both print the value and return the value.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I think that could work. I mean, so we could write a test that would test the value returned, but can we test the printing part of it though?
I guess not, but we can still return a string, right? And test that, correct?
You could, yeah. But that's exactly the point, right? So if you return something, you can test it. It's easy to test something that you return. When you do something like print, how do you test that? What kind of thing is printing to the console?
So side effect?
Yeah. Yep, it's a side effect. So thinking about design decisions, if you have a bunch of side effects everywhere, and let's say they're sprinkled, how do you test side effects? The answer is you can't really test side effects. You can kind of there are some workarounds. but you can't really test them. So what does that mean if you write an application and you can't test it?
Probably not a good application. Man.
Yeah, it's going to be tough, and you can't avoid side effects. That's that's just how most interesting things happen. You have to reach out to databases, you have to read files, you have to display things. But what you can do is limit. You can isolate. You can separate your code into things that are pure, functions that are pure, and then side affecting functions. So you can disentangle that from your application, and you can maximize the testable surface area of your application. So that's why writing tests, as one way writing tests can help you design a better application. All right, let's see if these tests pass. So Python. Okay, so all of my tests pass. They're not the most interesting tests, but we can build on this. All right. So let's start with getting all possible destinations. This is probably going to be the trickiest one. Not that tricky, but still. So where are we getting all possible destinations from?
Which CSV file?
Yes. So how do we read in a CSV file?
First, we got to import CSV.
Okay. Anyone else have any thoughts? Say what?
You can so you're talking about adding details to the method, right? That's all possible destinations.
Yeah, so we know that we're gonna have to read in the CSV file, but how do we read in a CSV file?
Yeah, so with open,
Okay.
you can use that built-in to read the file.
All right, cool. So we got with open, let me go back here. So what is with doing?
Is it not really sure.
Okay, that's fine. Anyone know what with does?
It's like opening the file and then it does whatever you code in there and then it closes the file when it's done.
Yeah, it's basically convenience syntax for, there are many kinds of things that you need to do, which include like get a resource, do something with the resource, release the resource. So the getting and releasing, it's just I get something, I do something, I release it. So you can, you can manually do all that. You can call open and then you can do stuff with it and then you can call close. But if you use with, it's basically just a convenience. It will automatically take care of closing the resource for you. Okay, so what do I pass to open?
The file name.
Okay. And then what do I do?
You can create a variable to store the file basically. So create a variable equals, and then use the function to read, like csv.reader.
Okay. So we'll actually we can create an instance of reader equals csv dot. We're gonna use the dict reader because we want a bunch of dictionaries. And we'll pass in that. Let's go ahead and print reader. All right, so I'm gonna go over here. I'm gonna do if name equals name. Okay, so we got a dict reader object.
What was the reason you did the if name equals? Is that yeah? What was the reason for that again?
That's a good question. Does anyone know?
Yeah, you want to read it as a dictionary. Did you forget the CSV underscore file as with open data.csv as CSV underscore file? Or is, I don't know.
Okay, so yeah, to get that. So this is actually just a variable name. So we can call this whatever you want.
Okay.
Call it CSV underscore file or F or whatever. It represents the file object.
Doesn't it only read like a row at a time? So you have to just do a quick loop and then print row by row, and it would print like an ordered dictionary of that
Yeah.
row.
Yes, but let's get back to this real quick. So why did I do this?
I feel like, isn't it just so you can only call it in this file and not in the other one, right?
Exactly. So
Okay.
if I call this directly, then this code executes. So if I do Python travel package.py, this executes. What if I want to run my tests? I get an error, but this should not have printed. Oh, okay. So this actually prints out here. That's because it's getting called in the unit test. But this code does not get executed when I run my unit tests. So it's just a convenience so that when I can run my unit tests without running any like whatever like ad hoc tests I have right here. Okay, cool. So reader, yes, to get back to the reader, yeah, it's gonna give you basically a generator. It's something that you can iterate over to get all the values. So if instead of just printing the reader, which is going to be this object, I can do for line in reader. Now I'll print the line. We run that file, and we see all of these get printed. So we have access to this. So this is what we want our data to look like, right? So we want to return a list of dictionaries. We can see we have, we can iterate over this and get each individual dictionary.
And you append that to the destination.
Okay, yeah, so we could append that here. So we have kind of a question where all of these methods are returning stuff, but then we also have all these instance variables. So if we call this method and we just append to this, do we need to return anything?
Could
Oh,
you
no,
oops, sorry.
yeah, I thought you were gonna append to all the possible destinations
Oh, yes, yes.
and then loop through that to get your desired destination and then append that to your destination and use budget. But yeah, sure.
Yeah, you're right. The first step is we're gonna append all of these here to all possible destinations. But my question is, so we have this method and we kind of initially thought that we're gonna return a list of dictionaries. But if we can just loop over this and then modify this, do we need to return anything?
I guess you don't if you want to access the instance variable directly, but I guess if we did use a get method, like it would add that level of like abstraction to not show the instance variables.
Yeah, so there's a legitimate question about how we want to go about this. So if we return this value and don't modify this, it would make it easier to test, right? Like we test this method, we pass in the data, and this would return. I'm going to use a list comprehension here, so I'm going to do so I'm going to run my test now. And let's see. I know. Sorry, 1 second. Let me see which test is failing real quick. We get an error. Test fetch destinations. That's what we're calling here. Fetch all possible destinations, right? So this is the one we're working on. And I have an error, which says return line for line in reader. So that I get an error, which is IO operation on a closed file. So this is maybe an error, a more rare error. Anyone tell me anything about what the problem might be?
Assuming IO stands for like input or output, is it
Yeah.
due to your like if name main call on the bottom that's causing it?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good thought. I think it's the problem is specific to how we're writing this method right here.
Do you have to indent in line 44?
Yeah, so remember how I said that this with stuff is it's basically convenience for opening it. You execute, open, you acquire a resource, you do something with the resource, and then when you leave the block, this will automatically close the resource. So when we're outside, here we're in the block, but over here we're outside of the block again. So that file has been closed now. So the file is closed and we're trying to access the stuff in it. So that will not work. If we do this, now it passes. And this test will also pass. Okay, so now we're returning this, but there's a question of, do we actually want to return this, or we could, assign this value here, etc. There's a few ways of doing this. So I'm just going to show you both real quick, and then we're just going to choose one somewhat arbitrarily. So the first way is I'm just going to return this from the method itself. But if I do that, when I actually want to run this, I'm gonna probably, since we are gonna need access to this all possible destinations in, at the very least, this one where we're filtering it, we're gonna have to have another method that kind of organizes all these other method calls. So def, I'll call it main, and I'll do all this self dot fetch all possible destinations. And then if I want to call self dot get destinations within user budget, I'll have to pass in all dest. That'll be one thing. And then I have to change the signature of this. Or what I could do is I could assign this, whatever this returns, to self dot all possible destination. And then I could use it elsewhere. So there's a few possibilities. I'm just going to leave it like this for now, but you could do it different ways. You could also just, as you said, just directly manipulate this and then return nothing in here.
So
Okay.
is the main method that you just declared down there, is that just for the purpose of running the file if you have like a lot of methods that call on other methods and it kind of like almost compiles in a way?
Exactly. So the point of this is like at some point, like all of these methods need to get called in a particular order, right? So we could have whoever's using this class just know that implicitly and call them all in the right order, or we could just kind of we could organize the order of those method calls in another method so that from the outside you just call main and everything works.
Would that be similar to using a runner file, or would there be different use cases for each method?
It's a similar kind of idea where you have a bunch of stuff going on and then you want to organize how you're actually calling it. So you can organize classes to where it contains a bunch of stuff, and then from the outside you don't need to know, like from the outside you don't need to actually, the only thing you need to know is that it has a main method. All these other methods could be like hidden away from you. You don't have to care about that. And then a runner will do the same thing. Usually a runner will have, you'll instantiate multiple classes and have them interact. So you kind of put the logic for putting all the pieces of your application together.
Also on the unit test for the assert is instance.
Yes.
Are you putting the data type in the second parameter?
Yeah.
Can other things go there as well?
What do you mean other things?
Like other checks, I guess, like maybe that's not the data type, but another something can go in there.
Oh yeah, definitely. So there's a whole bunch of assert statements. So this is just one of them. So assert is instance. This is kind of the most generic check you can do. You can also check particular values. So you could do self.assert equal and then call it and then check that it equals that particular list of dictionaries.
Cool.
Yeah, so we'll get to some of that in a sec. This is just the kind of generic outline to make sure, just to give us some scaffolding as we do this. All right. Cool. So travel package, we've got fetch all possible destinations. What else should we do next? So we get all the possible destinations. I would say let's get the user's budget. So there's a question here about how we want to design this. So we've, our initial decision was we have this method. So how might we implement this if we want to do it this way?
We probably need a input.
You could do that, so you can get it from the console. We could also pass it in as a parameter. So you have to call the method and pass it in. We could also make it part of the initialization. So it kind of just like, which one do you prefer? A lot of it depends on how your application is organized. I'm going to say for now that we make this something you have to pass in. So when you create an instance, you have to pass in. Actually, yeah, we'll do it that way. Okay. So now I'm just gonna. We don't need this anymore. I can run my tests. I've got an error now. So what's the error?
All of our instances got to have that budget in there now.
Exactly. So notice how I've got, I'm repeating this line a lot, right? Every test I'm creating an instance. So that's fine, but there's a method you can override in the test class. If you find that every time I run a test, I do X, you can package that up so you don't have to repeat yourself over and over again. And that method is called setup. And in setup, I can just put this code right here. I can do self dot TP is travel package. And I can eliminate these lines. And just add self dot to all these other ones. So setup will run before each test. So that's setup's job. So setup will run before each test. So setup will run and then run this test. Setup will run and then run this test. Setup will run and then run this test. So we just want to create a fresh travel package instance before each test that we can use. Okay, so we have the user's budget and we have all the list of destinations. So I think it makes sense to implement this one next. So destinations within a user's budget.
You could probably just do a list comprehension to filter whatever their user budget is.
Yeah. I'm just gonna add this other test real quick. So self.assert equal. I'm gonna use the assert equal method here. And self.tp.user budget. That should be equal to 1,000. So run these tests again. And all the tests passed. So assert is none, that's fine. Assert equal. This is really the workhorse. So this is the one you're going to use 90% of the time. Okay, but yes, so we could use a list comprehension to filter those down. So we have access to all possible destinations. So first thing I'll do is D4D and self dot all possible destinations. And then I'm gonna call this and just you know, to see what it prints out. And I'm gonna run not the test, but the travel package file directly. So I have to update this. Okay. And that should not be the return. Okay, so why did this print out this empty list of an empty dictionary?
We haven't appended any of the information into all possible destinations, just only returning it on the method.
Exactly. So what happened was, you know, I know how this is supposed to work. I know that you're supposed to call this one first and then this one, but I didn't actually do that. I just called this one directly. And so this all possible destinations was initialized to this and it wasn't modified. So so what we have to do now is we have to call our main method tp.main. And once we do that, we should have access to actual values. Okay, so now we have access to these values. So if I have a budget, let me just increase my budget to 1,200. So I want to only get this, right?
You would just write a if statement in the list comprehension.
Okay.
If self dot all possible destinations brackets cost is less than or equal to $1,200 or
Okay.
use
So I think we can look at each individual dictionary. So cost, if that is less than or equal to self dot user budget. All right, so let me print this out. Let's see. So I have a problem here. What is it telling me?
Basically can't compare the instances of string and integer.
That I mean these are integers, right? Cost is an integer.
Not access and cost and
It looks like there's strings with the quotes around them.
oh
Yeah. So I want these to be integers. I know deep down that they're integers, but they're actually just strings. So anytime you read something in from a CSV file, it's just a string. So we want these to be integers, so we need to cast them. So we can cast it to an integer. And if we run this, so that looks correct to me. So now what I want to do is update a unit test. So I want to write self blah blah blah. I'll write a new unit test. Actually, I'm going to include this here. So get destinations within budget. So I test, you know, I have that first test. I'm going to create a new instance. So TP2 equals travel package 1,200. And then one of the nice things about using classes is that we can kind of, because a class stores state, we can just give it values. So we can set it up any way we want. So I'm going to say, starting with here, I'm just going to assign this. So TP2 dot all possible destinations is going to be that. And if that's the case, then I'm going to expect asserts equal TB2 dot get destinations within user budget. That is going to be equal to this. So let's see if that test passes. Okay, so that does not pass. Let's see what the problem is. I get an error. Not expecting this one. So key error for cost. Does anyone see an obvious issue here? Let me try running the other code again. So travel package, that works. Then when I run the tests, let's look at the error message more carefully. So it's happening in line 40. So this is this is the third party stuff, but in my line 47. Return, blah, 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 all possible destinations. Well, what I'm going to first do is try and isolate and make sure that this is actually happening in this test. I'm going to run my test again. And I'm getting this. So I'm going to now comment out this. And my test passes. So there's somehow we've created a regression. So we had a test that was passing before, and now this is not passing. So what is the problem? Can anyone identify? Can you guys still read this if I zoom out a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
So what just happened is called a regression. We had a test that was passing. We made a change, we wrote another test, and so on. So stuff that was passing, this is one reason why it's good to have unit tests. Because when you start having more complicated applications, you can change one thing, which works just when you're looking at that, but it breaks something else that was working previously. So let's walk through what's happening. So we call this method. So we have our default TB blah, blah, blah thing. And then we call get destinations within user budget, which calls this. And what is self.all possible destinations when we create a class like this?
It's nothing for the first one, right? Because all of the prices are too low.
Well, yeah. Well, yes, that's also true, but it's just this list of an empty dictionary. So what is the error? The key error, the error is a key error. So it's going through this, which is a list of an empty dictionary, and saying, in this empty dictionary, grab me the key called cost. But that doesn't exist because it's just an empty dictionary.
So is it because your travel package is still 1,000, not 1,200, so it's not picking it up?
So it's actually not because of the cost, it's because we haven't we've set this as a default, and this empty dictionary doesn't have a key called cost. So we either have to create we have to call this, so self.all possible destinations, and give it a list of dictionaries that do have a key called cost. Or we could do some kind of error checking here, or we could get rid of this default value. So I'm going to get rid of this default value right here. Because we probably shouldn't have that anyway. And if I run this again, I think we're still going to get an error, but we can get a different error. None type is not iterable. So again, we have the same basic issue where we have none, and so we're trying to iterate on none, which doesn't exist. So we have a dependency, right? We can't just directly run this method on its own. We have to run this method first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat here, and I'm going to do self.tp dot blah 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 equals this. And now if I run this, it will pass. But you see that there's like some complexity involved here, because in order for this function to run, it's dependent on this being, populated and having a particular kind of shape, which is dependent on this running. So we've got some complexity here, and how do we manage that? All right, so I'm going to comment the rest of these in. Okay. All right, so let's try and wrap this up relatively quickly, because this has gone on pretty long. But so display confirmation message, blah blah blah. So now we can get all the destinations. So now we have to have the user choose a destination. So I'm going to try and go relatively quickly through this next little bit, just for the sake of time. So first problem is the user can choose a destination, but the user doesn't know what destinations are available. So we're going to have some other method, def, which is going to be show. Let's do alt display available destinations. And I'm going to do print self dot destinations and user budget. Okay, and so now main, we're gonna have to order this in a particular way. So we get all of our possible destinations, and then we're gonna have to filter that. So self dot destinations and user budget is going to be the return value of calling this. So we have our filtered list. Now we're going to have to give the user some options. Display available destinations. And then the destination, let's say this is a terminal app or something. So I'm going to do something like that. And then what I can do is I can either, we'll just go with the pattern of returning it. So return this. And we do self dot So you don't have a variable to hold whatever the user has chosen. So I'm going to add that. All right, so I'm just going to run. I'm going to run this ad hoc test. So I'm going to call self.main. Okay, so I start off with a budget of 1,200, and I have just one choice, so Japan, and then I'm gonna at the end print TP dot chosen destination, and that should be Japan. So that shows up there. Okay, and then we have a display confirmation message. So self dot display confirmation message. And then we are going to print. You are going to self dot. So we're not doing any error checking or anything like that, which we should do, but for the sake of time, I'm just gonna not do that. So let's run this one more time. So choose destination Japan, and you are going to Japan.
I have one more question for the unit test portion.
Yes.
On line 19, where you have to basically assign values, so then the rest of the code works.
Yep.
Could you do that in the setup method?
Yes, yeah, you definitely could. So the setup is like typically stuff that everything will share. It doesn't have to be, but it's typically stuff that everything will share. So depending on what else we're doing, we might not want every instance to be preloaded with this. But yeah, we definitely could do that there.
So in a way, the setup method could work like the main method in the actual class.
Yeah, we could also call, self.tp.main. And that would run everything. So that wouldn't work for the unit test in part because we have this issue, but yeah, we could do any setup here. So this is we're right here. What we're doing is we're kind of like faking it a little bit. We're creating an object and then we're directly manipulating the object's state to get it to where we want it to be, instead of going through the usual procedure of call this method, then call that method, and so on. So we're just kind of immediately getting whatever result. That's one of the nice things about object-oriented programming and testing is the object stores internal state, but you can directly manipulate it. So you don't have to actually go through all of the steps that you would have to do. You can just directly do that.
So would that be like Jordan mentioned about unit testing, like splitting up the unit test into like specifically like each class? Like would that be, I guess, useful for like then you could do a setup for each type of method that you're checking?
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
Save time.
Yeah, so you can split this. Like typically, we're just gonna have, since we only have one class, we're doing it this way. But yeah, if we have multiple classes, you would want to have like a test class for each class that you're testing. But you could also even break this up into multiple. Okay, real quick before we so I'm going to try to run the unit test now. So we have a problem, right? Try to run the unit test, and now my unit test, choose destination, requires this input. So I can't just like automate the unit test. I have to sit here now and I have to do, and this is not even like Okay, so this works, but it's not really good now. So I have a problem where this yeah. So I'm curious where this was happening. So choose destination. So it's I think it's happening right here. So I'm gonna comment these out and I'm gonna run this test again and I'm gonna see, yep. So here's the problem. I need to call this method, but I want to have a unit test, which is kind of sensible. And I don't have to sit here managing it. Unit tests are typically run, so you'll run them as you're developing, but they're also going to run like in an automated way. So you'll push up your code and then automated tests will run. So you can't, if you have automated tests, you can't have someone sitting there typing in, stuff to the console. So this is not going to work. And in some ways it's good that it's not going to work because this is also not great design. So this is an example of writing unit tests, kind of helping you write better code. So how do we solve this problem? Well, we have to basically take a step back and create some indirection. So what we're going to do is the destination is not going to be this thing directly. We could pass in a function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say input func, and instead of saying input, I'm going to do input func. Now, where is this going to come from? Well, we can do choose destination, and we can set this to input. And now I'm going to run not the unit test, but the regular code. And everything should work as normal. Japan. So everything works fine. So I've created a level of indirection here, and everything works exactly as before. So this input function is still going to get called here. But now what I can do is when I call choose destination in my unit test, I'm going to go run my unit test now. So this is still the same old thing. But now what I can do is I can pass it a function which will just return a value. So I can do lambda . And now my unit tests run. But I'm going to do another. So self dot assert equal self dot tp dot use destination. I can pass in the same function. And now the return value is going to be Japan. And that test passes. So this is a little tough to wrap your head around initially, but what I've done is I've decoupled this from this input. I created a layer of indirection. I'm just passing in a variable. And now when I call it, I can pass it whatever function I want. So I can pass it input as I did before, or I can pass it anything else. So this is nice for unit tests because I can, this is now a, non-side affecting function. I could also pass in anything else. So it makes it more flexible. So if there's some other input, not just console input, but maybe there's I don't know, web page input. So now I can pass that in. So now I've decoupled this from a specific implementation. That's a little more complicated, but that's that's why we talk about things like pure functions versus side effects and stuff like that.
Yeah, really quickly, the choose destination, like, so when you created the what is it even called? Is it just a variable or a function, an input function? Set that equal to input. So what is that? What exactly is that doing again?
So this is a default value, and input is the built-in Python function.
Mhm.
So input is the built-in Python. So if I do input whatever, so this is the same as this.
Mhm.
What I'm doing is basically assigning this function to a variable, and that indirection gives me more flexibility. So now input func just needs to be any function that takes a parameter. So instead of being tied to input specifically, now I can just use any function that takes a parameter and returns a value.
Okay.
It's
So for the
it's tough
anonymous,
to it's tough to wrap your head around, but this is a common kind of technique that you'll see.
for the anonymous function, is it so that's like what lambda d is, right? And then I guess is it just implicitly return like whatever we put there? So if you put France, then it would put France or
Yes.
whatever you want.
Yeah. So whatever is here is the return value. We could also just write a normal function there, but this is just a function that takes a parameter and returns a string, which is just what input is. It's a function that basically takes a string as input and returns a string. All right, cool. So that was probably fairly grueling. So I'm gonna stop the recording.